Hey, good morning, guys. How are you this morning? I'm feeling quite good. It's been raining a little bit, right? We call it monkey rain, right? Because there is the sun, the sky is not clouded, and yet it is raining. Okay, guys, this morning we are going to discuss or consolidate our lessons, our past lessons on rural settlements. We will start off by defining the concept of settlement. Settlement refers to a group of people living together as a single connected system. Okay? A group of people living together as a single connected system. Now, when it comes to rural settlements, it is important that we start off by also discussing what is the rural hierarchy. Okay? What is the rural hierarchy? In other words, what we have at the bottom and what do we have on top in terms of the number of settlements within an area, which we can also use to classify the type of settlement. For example, at the lowest level in the hierarchy of rural settlements, we have the isolated farmstead. Now, the isolated farmstead can best be identified by the number of settlements in the area. In an isolated farmstead, there will usually be one family. Okay? Usually one family or one settlement. Up the isolated farmstead, we have the local service center. And the local service center is differentiated from the isolated farmstead in that you're going to find between 5 to 6 buildings, 5 to 6 settlements. And up the ladder from the local service center, you're going to find the minor country town. How does the minor country town differ from the local service center? It differs in that instead of finding 5 to 6 buildings, as you would find in the local service center, you're going to find several hundreds of buildings. Okay? And now, up the ladder from the minor country town, we have the country town. Now, how do you differentiate the country town from the minor country town? The country town, instead of having 5 or hundreds of buildings, it will have between 10 to 20,000 people settling in the area. All right, now let us proceed to discuss site and situation, right? Now, what does site refer to? Site refers to the land on which the settlement is built. And as we discussed in the past lessons, there are several factors which influence the site. For example, flatland, for example, wet point settlement, or dry point settlement, and so on. Now, when it comes to situation, situation refers to the position of the settlement in relation to the surrounding environment. Okay, the position of the settlement in relation to the surrounding environment. And I hope you recall that in the last or in the lesson on which we were trying to use the topographical map, right? The exercise actually, where we're using the topographical map extra to be able to classify the site and the situational factors. When it comes to situation, usually we have to refer to the position of a settlement in relation to the surrounding areas. For example, we would refer to a certain settlement or settlement A, right, is south of settlement B or east of settlement C or west of settlement D, right? In other words, those, when you're classifying situation, usually it's a smart thing to use directions. And remember, in the last lesson, I said to you that When we speak of direction, we are talking north, south, east, or west, and that is a good strategy to answer questions related to situation. Now, we also have to classify settlements. For example, you will find a question, or you may come across a question that says, classify the given settlement. Now, what are the terms that you have to use when you're classifying settlements? Sometimes the questions will be quite specific. They'll say, classify the settlement according to function, or classify the settlement according to size, or classify the settlement according to site, or according to complexity. Now, when it comes to function, usually you will find that rural settlements will be primary functional. In other words, usually primary activities such as farming and mining. Now, if it's urban settlements, they will usually be multifunctional, whereby you're going to find secondary, tertiary, quaternary activities, and so on. Now, what if you have to classify settlements according to size, right? When it comes to size, we go back to the rural hierarchies. For example, a certain settlement can be classified as an isolated farmstead, or all the way up the ladder into a country town, depending on the number of settlements that are present in the area. When it comes to pattern, right? When it comes to pattern, we are referring to the general location of the buildings in a certain area. In other words, are there other buildings around the area, or is there a single building? And if there is a single building, we are going to classify it as isolated. Now, if there are several, but not too many buildings around the isolated building, we are going to classify them as dispersed. And this is usually a pattern that can be common to rural areas. Now, the other word that we can use to classify settlements in terms of pattern is nucleated. What do we mean by nucleated? By nucleated, we mean that the buildings will be clustered together, or they will be clumpered together. And this kind of pattern is usually common in urban areas. However, keep in mind that in some rural areas, you may also find nucleated settlement patterns, even though that is a rarity. Okay? Now, the other term you can use to classify the settlement is in terms of complexity. When it comes to complexity, we are referring to infrastructure. For example, rural settlements will have limited basic services available, such as water and electricity. And in contrast to that, urban areas will have more complex infrastructure, services, healthcare, education, banks, and so forth. Right? I hope so far you are understanding and you have got no questions. All right? Now I'll proceed to end the lesson with the rural settlement issues. Okay? Now, what do rural settlement issues refer to? When we think about the rural settlement issues, we are referring to the common problems which are faced by rural areas. And one of the biggest problems that is faced by rural areas is rural-urban migration. In other words, rural-urban migration refers to more and more people moving from the rural areas, right, being attracted to the urban areas. Okay? It refers to more and more people from the rural areas attracted to the urban areas. So if they are attracted to the urban areas, they'll be moving from the rural areas to the urban areas. Now, let me give you just a single example as to why rural-urban migration is a problem for the rural dwellers. It is a problem for the rural dwellers, and yet at the same time, as we shall see later, it is also a problem for the urban dwellers. That is why at this point in time, we should not confuse the issue of rural urban migration to urbanization. Okay? Now, rural urban migration simply refers to more and more people leaving the rural areas to go to the urban areas. And when it comes to urbanization, obviously the number of people living in the urban area growing. The growth of the urban area due to the growing settlements in the urban area, due to the high number of people that are living in the urban area, right? Now, why is it a problem for rural dwellers? For example, think about services. It is very difficult for a water providing company or for an electricity providing company to be attracted to providing those services in rural areas, simply because there are no people, or there is very little amount of people in the rural areas, right? So now, how does it become a problem for the rural dwellers? Imagine that the rural dwellers, where will they get their water from? They'll be relying on natural sources of water, such as boreholes or rivers, right? Such as boreholes or rivers, okay? And it's not always conducive to rely on boreholes or rivers. You understand why. These can dry out, increasing the problem of drought and food security, as well as groundwater sources which are used for they're becoming more and more scarce by the day. What are they going to use for energy? They'll be increasingly relying on firewood for energy, right? And we also know the problems that come with relying on firewood for energy supplies, okay? All right, guys, the lesson ends here, and I'll end with a summary of what we have discussed. Okay, we have discussed the concept of settlement, and then we proceeded, or our focus was on rural settlements. We looked at the rural hierarchies, in other words, the lowest level to which we can classify a rural settlement, the isolated farmstead, up to the highest level to which we can classify a rural settlement as the country town. We discussed the site and situation factors. We also focused on the classification of settlements. And finally, we talked about the common problems that are faced by the rural settlements. And that is rural and urban migration. Thank you, guys. Thank you for your time. And I hope you've enjoyed. Goodbye.